Hey everybody, Greg Poole here at Bowjunky Media, bowjunkymedia.com. We're here at the 2021 Rushmore Rumble in Yankton, South Dakota. This weekend's coverage is brought to you by Beaumar Archery. So this particular feature here is an idea I had last week after several conversations I've had with folks that were asking about pros and pressure. I know that, as much as a lot of us want to joke that Jesse Broadwater doesn't have a pulse, which is almost verified, but really, the idea here was to get together a group of pros and monitor their stress, monitor their oxygen levels, pulse levels, etc., before, during, and after the round. And basically, that's what I did. I am using a Pulse Oximeter, which basically I would assume means it monitors your pulse and your oxygen on this meter. And basically, how it works is this: is you just put it on the finger, and it reads out like that, assuming that that's read out already. So 78 and 97. I can tell you right now that when I did this before we hit record, my pulse was my resting heart rate was 68. So just turning on the camera took my pulse from 68 to 78. Obviously, that's not a huge giant swing. It's not like it jumped to 120 or anything. But basically what I did, and it's going back down to 68 now, but basically what I did was I selected a group of pros. I got their consent before, so don't email me and message me about, well, that's their health information. I talked with them all. They all consented. It's just a heart rate and oxygen levels, so don't get too upset here. But basically what I did is I selected some standard reading measurements. So I have a baseline, and there will be a graphic that's going to be coming up on the screen to kind of show you all of this information. But what I did was I used this meter, and I took everybody's heart rate and oxygen levels at a baseline. It was usually about half hour, 45 minutes before they shot. Then I took another reading right before the first end for score, not practice. First end for score. Then I waited, took another reading at halftime after they switched targets top to bottom, bottom to top, and then I took another reading at the end of the round, not before the final end of shooting, but when the actual complete round was done. And basically the reason for that is I felt, and obviously, folks, this is not scientific. I'm not a certified doctor. I am not a cardiologist. I'm not any of that. However, this machine reads out extremely well. There were several archers on the championship line that have watches, and they were monitoring themselves already. So basically, I felt that these 4 data points would give us a good representation of kind of what is happening with these archers and their bodies as the rounds went on. And I think that you're going to see, once this graphic comes up, that not only did that prove itself out, but some of the results were shocking. Some of the results were shocking. I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I was not prepared for some of the things that I saw. And the interesting fact is, for you folks at home, I just wanted to illustrate that, number one, yes, pros, the best in the world, feel pressure. Yes, that it affects their heart rate. Oxygen levels are really a result of controlling that breathing. And if you're controlling that breathing, you're also going to help control the heart rate. You're also going to help control your oxygen levels. And for those of you that don't know, the very first thing to run out of a human body when it comes to oxygen are your eyeballs. So when you come to full draw and you're aiming, and your eyes start to burn a little bit, that's because you're running out of oxygen. And so with these archers, all of these readings showed me a couple things. Number one, while they are doing what they can to control their heart rates, obviously there were some pretty big jumps, but the oxygen levels remain. So whether the heart rate's up or down, they are controlling their breathing enough to make sure that they're staying oxygenated, which is incredibly important for the muscles, for the vision, for all of that. So the archers that I chose for this is, of course, going to be a pretty familiar list of people, but obviously number one on the list, in no particular order, I just wrote them down as I saw them yesterday, was Levi Morgan. Number 2 on the list is Jesse Broadwater. then Chance Beaubouef, Paige Pearce, Chris Perkins, senior pro Keith Trail, Donnie Thacker, Stephan Hansen, 2020 Vegas champion Kyle Douglas, and Shane Wills. And so these names were simply chosen as I saw them walking by. I'm friends with all of them, and obviously this was not an invasive process. I wasn't standing next to them on the line, putting this on their finger in between arrows, none of that stuff. It absolutely did not affect any of these folks shooting whatsoever. So let's just kind of go over some of these results and talk about kind of what you see in some of these fluctuations here. So let's start with Levi. Obviously, he was the first one on the list. So his baseline reading was a heart rate of 68 with a blood oxygen level of 97. That's pretty darn good. That's pretty much what I was just sitting here doing nothing. When I measured him, he was sitting over at the table pretty much doing nothing. So that's pretty good. Right before his first arrow for score, Levi's heart rate went from 68 beats per minute to 98 beats per minute. That's a 30 beat per minute jump. That's pretty stout. His oxygen level actually went up. So he went from 68 and 97 to 98 and 98. So big jump in the heart rate and also an increase in the oxygen level as well. At halftime, obviously things, and for reference, yes, Levi missed a point or two early on in the round, so obviously that kind of relieves that tension. At halftime, Levi's pulse was 77. So his big jump at the first end for score obviously things had calmed down and he had kind of gotten back into that flow. Oxygen level at 95, still very acceptable. At the end of the round, when the round was completely over, Levi's heart rate was 85, oxygen level at 95. So as you can see, there was a huge jump right at the beginning of the round. As things got into the round, he pretty much leveled out, and then at the end, he was probably pretty glad to be done with the day. Moving on to Jesse Broadwater, this one's pretty interesting. Jesse started off baseline at a 68 beats per minute with a 99 oxygen level. So whatever Jesse has going on in the old lungs there, he's working at a very efficient level. Right before the first arrow for score, Jesse went from a 68 beats per minute to 85. So pretty decent jump, not gigantic, but still pretty stout. At halftime, Jesse came down to a 78 beats per minute with 97 blood oxygen level. Now, the interesting thing about Jesse here, and Jesse did clean yesterday, so Jesse is still in it to win it. So at the end of the round, when Jesse was done and he had shot 60, he had shot a perfect 600, right after the round was over, his heart rate was 102. So Jesse's heart rate was actually higher when the round was over than it was at any time before or during the round. I thought that was pretty interesting. Kind of makes sense, especially for someone like Jesse, who has always been known for maintaining his composure under pressure. And that's one of the other things is the reason I did this, the reason I did this is so that you folks at home can see that even though your heart rate's elevated, even though your breathing might be a little suspect, there is a way to manage it, and there is a way to still perform when those physical changes and those things are happening within your body. So here we go with Chance Beaubouef. Chance's baseline was a 69 beats per minute, 94 on the oxygen. For those of you that know Chance well, you know that he runs cold, like very cold. Like his hands, not because he was outside where it's a real feel of 35 below zero, but Chance generally runs very, very cold, especially in his hands. And so some of this stuff absolutely makes sense. So Chance started off a baseline at 69. Right before his first arrow for score, he jumped up to a 108. So that's a pretty significant jump. Also keep in mind, Chance Beaubouef cleaned it yesterday, so Chance is still in it to win it. And so he went from a 69 to a 108. At halftime, he was about a 118. Now, for those of you paying attention, Chance is one of the guys that I mentioned earlier that actually wears a watch and monitors his watch religiously. So throughout the round, as I would test Chance, he was comparing it to his watch, and they were pretty much online. But he made comments that for some reason his heart rate is staying right about 100 or above, which he was expecting to be down a little bit. He contributed that to the scheduling this year, this being the first tournament of the year, indoors, period. And so he just felt like, and Chance even said to me yesterday, no matter how many times you win Vegas, no matter how many times you win any of these indoor events, it never gets easier. And so Chance was able to maintain that. So halfway through, at the half, his rate was 118, blood oxygen level of 96. At the end of the round, when Chance had cleaned it and Chance was good to go, was his highest rating of 130. So Chance was pretty excited. Chance was pretty stoked to have. Now externally, you couldn't really tell. Chance is an extremely cool guy when it comes to maintaining his composure. But you can see there that Chance's heart rate of 130 at the end of the round, when he was all done, tells you that, one, he was pretty excited to get that 600 under his belt, but that at that point, he just kind of let things naturally take place. Paige Pearce. For any of you cardiologists out there, I don't know what to tell you. Don't contact me for Paige's information, and please don't contact Paige recommending that she seek medical attention. This is normal for Paige. Paige absolutely said this is what she does. It is what it is. So Paige's baseline readings were 135, a heart rate of 135 over 98. So she has plenty of oxygen. Her heart is just working overtime. Now, I will say, full disclosure, right before the round, she was pounding a green OG monster. It's what she does. She's one of the most successful female archers ever, so I'm not judging. I couldn't do it, but obviously Paige is working it out. Now, here's where things get very interesting. Before her first arrow for score, Paige's heart rate was 170. 170. Now, I'm not sure I've ever had a heart rate of 170, even when I've been on a treadmill sweating like you can't. I don't understand it. However, in the first end for score, Paige did actually hit her arm pretty substantially, left a big bruise, and she ended up shooting an 8. Obviously, when you hit your arm, it doesn't matter nerves or heart rates, but that's pretty stout. So she went from 135 to 170. At halftime, she had actually dropped down to 125, which from all the things that I had tested Paige on, 125 to 130 is about her normal heart rate. Now, obviously, I didn't test her when she was asleep or any of that, but when Paige is awake and when Paige is doing her thing here, her heart rate resting is about 125. Oxygen levels still at 97, so fantastic oxygen levels. So obviously her heart is just working overtime. At the end of her round, Paige's heart rate was 148. And so that's just slightly elevated for Paige. That is extremely elevated for me. That is literally what my heart gets up to when I am feeling like I'm going to die on the treadmill or the stepper. So that just is what it is. But one of the things about Paige is through all of her measurements, her blood oxygen level was 98, 97, 97, 97. So regardless of what her heart's doing, her oxygen levels are fantastic, which means her breathing is good. So she is maintaining some fantastic breathing patterns. Her heart is just working on a different clock. And so that was extremely interesting there. So let's get down to Chris Perkins. Chris Perkins, obviously one of the most successful archers on the male tour from Canada. He started off with a resting heart rate of 75 with an oxygen level of 95. When he came to shoot his first arrow for score, he jumped up to a 105 and a 98. So his heart rate elevated quite a bit, 30 beats per minute, but his oxygen level also went up 3 points. So that means he's really controlling his breathing as well. At halftime, obviously Chris had kind of mellowed out a bit. Things were on track. His heart rate was about 99, and his oxygen level was 95. So oxygen level came down to what it was before. It was 3 points higher when he started, but that's to be expected with that increase of emotion and endorphins. At the end of Chris's round, who Chris did shoot a perfect 600 yesterday. So once again, similar to Jesse Broadwater, folks, at the end of Chris's round, when he was all done, his heart rate was 109. So similar to Jesse, when the round was completely over was when Chris Perkins' heart rate reached its highest point. So that's pretty impressive. Oxygen levels at 98. So Chris obviously managing things extremely well. Keith Trail, senior championship, senior pro shooter. Keith Trail, first ever senior, shoot a 900 in Vegas. He was a paratrooper. He jumped out of airplanes for a living, so these numbers don't surprise me a bit, because when you've been jumping out of airplanes under fire for decades, archery's really not going to affect you too much. So Keith Trail's resting heart rate at baseline was 80, and his oxygen levels were 99. So that's pretty good, not only for a senior, but for a guy who fires off lung rockets on a regular basis. Lung rockets or cigarettes. Right before the first arrow for score, Keith's heart rate jumped up to an 87. So he only went from 80 to 87. His oxygen levels did drop 3 points to a 96. So very, very composed for Keith Trail. At halftime, Keith Trail's heart rate was 82, and his blood oxygen levels were 94. So he was absolutely keeping things high and tight when it comes to the heart rate, to the breathing. The most interesting one for me here is at the end of the round when he was done, Keith Trail's heart rate was 79. So his lowest heart rate reading was when he was actually completely done. Now, I will say Keith did drop a couple points yesterday, so he's not necessarily, not to say that some other guys can't fall back to him, but right now he is definitely not leading the pack. So does that have an effect on the 79 beats per minute when the round is over? Hard to say, but Keith's numbers were absolutely impressive with an 80 as a baseline, 87, 82, and 79. By far the most stable out of the entire group. Donnie Thacker. Donnie Thacker shot incredibly well yesterday. He did end up missing a point, said he just got excited and pushed one out the left. But Donnie Thacker's baseline was 83 beats per minute, 99 oxygen level, so that's pretty impressive. One note, when I say resting heartbeat, you have to understand that just being in this room is not the same resting heart rate you're going to have when you're at home. It's just not. This environment, the trade show, the vibe, the people, there's a lot of energy in here, and people are going to respond to it. So Donnie was 83 and 99. Right before his first arrow for score, his heart rate went to 98. So little bit of a jump right there, not massive, but a jump. Oxygen level stayed at 96. So definitely he's not hyperventilating. Things are on track here for Donnie as well. At half, Donnie was 95 and 95. So heart rate of 95, blood oxygen level of 95 as well. So definitely on track there. At the end of his round, even though he had missed a point and he was visibly irritated. I'll just say visibly irritated, and we'll leave it at that. His heart rate was 90. Blood oxygen level was 95 as well. So Donnie definitely has his breathing, definitely has his heart, under control. And besides the one shot that he acknowledged, he shot a little strong and got a little excited and pushed. Donnie's a lefty, so his pushing is going to be out the left. So 90 and 95 to end. So good job there on Donnie. Now this one's pretty interesting. This is one of the other guys that I mentioned along with Chance Beaubouef, who actually wears a watch and monitored. This gentleman told me to the number what his halftime heart rate was going to be. Literally to the number without looking at his watch, because he says he can actually feel it as the round goes on. He literally knows exactly what it's going to be. So, and that's Stephan Hansen. Stephan Hansen's resting heart rate before he started was 69, blood oxygen level of 97. So that's pretty low, right on par with Jesse Broadwater right there. But obviously, for those of you that watch Stephan Hansen's social media, you can see that he's been doing a lot of biking and he's been doing a lot of running. So Stephan has definitely been working on his cardio game or his health. We'll just say Stephan's definitely been working on his health and his beard. He's got a pretty nice beard going right there. But so Stephan started off at 69 and 97. Right before the first arrow for score, his heart rate jumped up to 98 and blood oxygen level of 96. So pretty good jump from him. And what's interesting is at halftime, he literally told me my heart rate's going to be the exact same as right before the first arrow. I can feel it. And he told me it's going to be about 98. And sure enough, at half, his heart rate was the exact same as it was right before the first arrow, 98. Oxygen level also at 98. So at half, his heart rate was the exact same as right before he started for score, but his oxygen levels had came up a couple of points. And I know people are like, oh, a couple of points isn't too bad, but you have to understand that in a medical situation, when you drop below 90, they put you on oxygen. So if you drop below 90, hospitals and doctors are putting you on supplemental oxygen for a reason. So 2 points is more than you would think. At the end of the round, when it was all said and done, and by the way, of course, Stephan Hansen did clean yesterday's round, so he is still in it to win it. At the end of his round, it was 78 with a blood oxygen level of 97. So Stephan is definitely in tune with what he has going on. He is definitely monitoring his stuff to be the most efficient and effective archer that he definitely can be. The next one here, this one's interesting to me. It's 2020 Vegas champion Kyle Douglas, who most all of you have seen is cool as a cucumber. He doesn't say a lot. He doesn't act out a lot, and he absolutely pounded yesterday. However, in the 10th end, he did drop a point. So he shot like 56 out of 60 X's, but he did drop a point. So I don't think there's no lucky dog this weekend, so unfortunately Kyle's going to be out of it. But his baseline to start, about 45 minutes before we started shooting, was a heart rate of 96 with a blood oxygen level of 97. So that's a little bit elevated to start, but like I said, it makes sense. He was in the booth with Tim Gillingham over there and just kind of chilling out, but just there's a lot of energy in this environment. So here's the interesting one. And everyone knows Kyle can pound. He just went out and won the Idaho Open, and Kyle is a force to be reckoned with indoors and outdoors. Kyle's heart rate right before his first arrow was 120. So he went from 96 to 120. That's a pretty good jump. Obviously, he pounded out. It didn't affect him at all, but that's a pretty substantial jump right there. At halftime, of course, he had calmed down. Say calmed down, I don't necessarily mean like he was freaking out, but at halftime, things had mellowed out for him. He was, he was rolling right along. So his halftime heart rate was 82. Blood oxygen level of 97, pretty much exact same as his baseline. So obviously his breathing was under control. His heart rate had come back down, and he was just kind of cruising. No, in the 10th end, when I saw him miss that point, I did not take his measurements because you could see that he was visibly irritated. So I wasn't going to impose upon him. It was obvious he was not happy about it, as he shouldn't be. However, 2 ends later, when he completed the round, his heart rate was at 72, oxygen of 96. So those are pretty good numbers at the end. Obviously, missing the point in the 10 was a pretty big letdown. So at that point after the round, there's really nothing, there's not much to be excited about. He shot well, but like he said in his post, he feels like he let himself down, and he shot incredibly well. All right, the last person on our list was Shane Wills. For those of you that know Shane, he has been on the podium in Outdoor Nationals a ton. Won the Classic, won Reading. I mean, he is a fantastic shooter and a great guy. Shane's baseline was 88 beats per minute and 96 as an oxygen level. One of the things about Shane that you need to understand is he has a job. So he is not a professional. He shoots professionally, of course, as he should, but he doesn't shoot archery for a living. He shoots it for the love of the game and because he's really good at it. But that is one thing to keep in mind is Levi, Jesse, Chance, Paige, Chris, Keith at this point, not Donnie. Donnie has a real job. Real job. That didn't sound right. Donnie has a regular job. Stephan shoots for a living. Kyle shoots for a living, but he also owns an archery shop. So several of these people on here actually have regular jobs that they shoot, that they work, that actually allows them to shoot professionally. So with Shane, he has a wife, 2 beautiful kids at home, and so he's working a lot. So he hasn't necessarily been able to shoot the full tour that he would like to have shot the last several years, especially not last year. So he was 88, 96 to start. Right before the first arrow, his heart rate had jumped to 120. So he went from 88 to 120. That's a pretty substantial jump. Managed to hold things together. He was clean all the way through half. I'm not sure at which point he dropped an arrow. You can check the post from yesterday, but right before the first arrow for score, he was at a 120 and a 97 for his blood oxygen level. So blood oxygen level was good. He was maintaining his breathing, staying oxygenated, but obviously the heart rate was pretty elevated. That's the whole first and for score nerves right there. We all know what that's about. At halftime, his heart rate was maintaining that at 125 and 97. So Shane's heart rate and blood oxygen levels had pretty much maintained from the first arrow all the way until halftime. At the end of the round, Shane's heart rate was at 114, starting to come down a little bit, 96 for a blood oxygen level. Obviously, he had dropped a point, so he was a little bit upset about that. Shane tends to hold himself to a pretty high standard, so missing that point obviously had mildly irritated him. He had some of the redhead going because he was a little bit upset, which we all know how that works. So that's pretty much the data for the look, folks. This is the first time that I've ever done this before. If this kind of data is something that interests you, say so in the comments. I just got this and I was going around doing it manually. If this is some information that we think can be beneficial to you folks at home, I know all of the archers involved were literally every time I walked by, let me see that. Or I'd walk by and they'd all start pointing their finger at me like this to come take their measurements, because the ones that didn't have the watches, once they realized what this data was going to show, they all wanted to know as well. So I don't think I'm going to keep using this and manually doing it. It was a ton of work. I walked across this building a jillion times yesterday. My feet are killing me because it's just concrete. However, if this is something that you guys feel would be beneficial moving forward, let me know in the comments. They do have some other apparatuses that I could, potentially procure and put on people in shoot-offs, etc. But my main intent with this, folks, was to let you people know at home that, number one, yes, all of these pros have pulses. They all have blood flowing through their veins, even Jesse Broadwater and Chance Beaubouef and Levi Morgan. Obviously, how they maintain under those pressures, how they maintain and perform when their heart rates are elevated is something that I felt that you guys could really benefit from. One of the other things is breathing. These blood oxygen levels, you didn't see massive drops in the oxygen level because every single one of these pros is maintaining a solid breathing pattern. Period. Even though their heart goes up, now you can hold your breath and your heart rate will come up, but your oxygen level will drop. So what all this data shows me is, regardless of what their heart's doing, they're maintaining a breathing pattern that keeps them oxygenated and allows them to keep performing. And that's a huge factor, because no matter what your heart's doing, no matter what your breathing's doing, and basically no matter what your oxygen's doing, you still need to be able to perform. So what this data shows us is that regardless of what your heart's doing, it is possible to keep yourself oxygenated, maintain your breathing patterns, and still perform under pressure. I will probably take some of these measurements before today's round. Possibly, I probably can't do it during because we'll be doing the live feed, but this was something that I just wanted to do for you folks at home so you can kind of check this out. Like I said, if you think this is something that you'd like to see more of, once again, it's a Bowjunky media, hashtag original. And so we will keep bringing you guys the most authentic and interesting coverage that we can come up with, because like I always say, if I wouldn't watch it, why would I expect you to? And so stuff like this to me was super intriguing. I completely nerded out on this. And so let me know in the comments. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We're going to get this put up, and we're going to get ready to do some live feeds today. So everybody stay tuned to Bowjunky Media for more ongoing coverage from the 2021 Rushmore Rumble.